Hello and welcome to the second session of the 2023 McKnight's Tech Awards and Summit. We hope you've been enjoying today's emphasis on technology innovations that can help long-term care providers work smarter and more efficiently. We're going to continue on that theme for the next hour. You've tuned into Staffing in the Automation Era, Right and Wrong Ways to Use AI. I'm McKnight's Long-Term Care News Senior Editor Kim Marcellus, and I'll be moderating our panel today. I'll introduce you to our speakers in just a moment, but first we do have some housekeeping to take care of. If you're having any audio problems with this broadcast, please check the volume control on your device. This is the most common cause of audio issues. Please note that the sound should be coming from your computer speakers. We will have time for a Q&A segment near the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to type those out and start submitting them to us right now. That goes in the box on the left side of your screen. And any questions that we don't get to in real time can be addressed afterward by email. While we don't have any slides today, if you stay tuned, I'll share details with you on how to watch this session on demand and share it with others. Excuse me. Now, regarding continuing education. This educational offering has been reviewed by the National Continuing Education Review Service of the National Association of Long-Term Care Administrator Boards. It has been approved for 1 clock hour. However, you do need to stay tuned to the event in its entirety during this original broadcast to receive a certificate. You can track CE requirements through the course completion tracker, which is accessed to the last icon in the area below the open webinar panel. Once you've achieved 50 viewing minutes, a View Certificate button will display, and the required viewing duration will have a green checkbox. You can then view and save your certificate. A copy will also be emailed to you afterward. And with that, let's meet today's panelists. Ben Tengelson is Vice President of Data Science for IntelliCare. He's hyper-focused on projects related to pricing, personalization, and market balance. Ben specializes in using causal inference, machine learning, and randomized experiments to help improve IntelliCare's apps to better serve facilities and nursing professionals. We also have Rip Martin, who is Chief Strategy Officer for IntelliCare. Rip brings significant experience across the intersection of strategy, healthcare, and technology, having led both large enterprises and startup teams throughout his career. Prior to IntelliCare, he was a leader at Phillips Ventures and Boston Consulting Group. Thanks for being here, Ben and Rip.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Kim.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. AI is a topic that not everyone here knows everything about, or even maybe a little bit about. So, Rip, can you provide a brief overview of AI and some of the related terminology that people tend to throw around, but maybe don't know what it means or have a good understanding of?
Sure, Kim, thanks. And it's a helpful place to start because AI is used as this umbrella term to colloquially mean anything that's a little bit smarter than it used to be. And oftentimes, most of the technology being used to do those smarts are not actually AI. There's some kind of an algorithm or some kind of process automation that's been put into typically a piece of software to help somebody do their job a little bit better, faster, or more informed. AI is a subset of those technologies that are often used to inform what an algorithm might look like, where you typically start with either a real world data set or something that you're trying to train against and a test data set and run it through a series of computers to see if you can replicate what the outcome might look like. But you oftentimes don't really know how that's being done. There's a series of black box technologies that are under the hood and we won't get into today that help those things come to be. But people may have heard of terms like machine learning or deep learning or neural networks that are all just different ways of plumbing those computers together to create a different outcome. And they get smarter and smarter and smarter over time. Most recently, large language models are a great example of how AI technologies are taking that exact same set of principles and applying it across larger and larger data sets and larger types of questions to ask. So today we'll spend most of our time on what types of questions are good for AI versus good questions for something that's a standard algorithm that you can say exactly what happened and all the paths that the data needed to go through in order to make that happen. that's a really important distinction between how AI works and how other computer automation works.
Okay, good starting point. So, where are we seeing some of these technologies being applied in long-term care? Ben, you want to start on the administrative side?
Yeah, for sure. So we are in the middle of an AI boom across the board, and long-term care is no exception. And there's certainly benefits to the clinical side, and I'll focus on the administrative side of things. So the first example, and we'll drill into this one a little bit deeper later, is scheduling optimization. And we definitely see products on the market right now that advertise using AI technology to automate and optimize scheduling. There's also credentialing validation and automation, and even like looking at credentials and extracting the information from it and making sure that those manual tasks of reviewing documents individually can be accelerated. And then there's a lot of kind of just day-to-day office automation that we can do as far as billing and coding. And AI is really good at finding patterns and either continuing those patterns or identifying things that break that pattern, which could be errors potentially in your billing codes or in your scheduling, even where if somebody fat fingered a number that shouldn't be in your reporting or in your code somewhere, then AI can see that and say, hey, that's not a normal thing, and improve our workflows by reducing those day-to-day errors. There's also a lot, especially with these large language models, that are the new and cool thing, and really the reason why we're talking about AI right now, is that you can use AI now to write and to generate content, and not just write essays or papers, but things like menus or things like job openings and role specifications or announcements. And so if there's a lot of time spent writing, that's something that you can now use AI to accelerate and probably not replace upfront what you would normally do, but you can get your work done a lot faster using AI to do those sorts of things.
And you're going to leave it there, great. Talking to a writer. Okay,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
Rip. I'll transition to you, Rip. Talk to us a little bit about the clinical uses.
And it's actually helpful just to reflect on what Ben was just saying in terms of finding ways to optimize really complicated problems that have a lot of different parameters that you're trying to consider. And it's really hard to write if this, then that set of rules to describe every single case without melting your computer. AI is really good at picking out those either typical or in many cases atypical answers to a problem that you wouldn't otherwise see as a human. So it can help you do something a little bit better and faster that way. In terms of that creativity, it's about getting somebody started on something where you need to have a human guide what that question needs to look like, and then do a lot of tailoring at the end to make sure that what's being generated really fits with the audience you're looking for. So using AI to generate a role specification that is something that will resonate with the target audience you're looking for, it can do a chunk of the work, but you still need to ask the right kinds of questions around what clinical credentials or what work locations, and make sure that the tone of that content reflects that of your facility. These are things that are really important for humans to work alongside the technology, and really won't end up in a situation where the technology is replacing the people. It just makes the people that much more effective. I think you started asking a question about the clinical side of this. In addition to the administrative side, this is where AI can help answer some of these foundational questions. But as soon as you get to making a clinical decision, you really need to know how that decision was made and have a provenance around what information led to making a specific choice. So you can use AI to inform what those things might look like, but to be a regulated medical device or to be released as a validated product that a set of clinicians can actually work behind, you need to take what you've learned through the AI models and build them into something that's a repeatable algorithm that shows, if I do it this way, this is the outcome I'll receive. This is an area FDA is working around right now to try and get better around it, but the technology is moving faster than the regulation in this space. There are a series of clinical and social optimizations that can benefit from AI, like looking at social determinants of health of all the things that are going on around your facility, and indicating what might be going on with your residents that staff might see if they had eyes on all the time, but technology can actually help behind the scenes to go make this happen. In a prior world, and certain companies that we were working with from an investment basis were doing this with locating services around a facility to understand which residents were receiving care from which staff members, and which residents were spending time in and out of their rooms on different time scales, or what their sit to stand power ratio looks like off of wearables or nearables, and using trending data in those observations to indicate whether somebody was increasingly reclusive or if they were an increasing falls risk, and how to make sure to pre-position support resources to prevent decline across that population. So understanding data that's going on around you, and that data can be things that are obvious, like there's a sensor on a wall watching you, or pendant presses or wall cord pulls, but they can also be things that you might not necessarily think of, like what channel is somebody's watching on TV, or whether they're flipping through channels constantly, or whether they're going to the dining room to engage in a social meal versus if they're taking a meal in their room, and putting all of that information together to come up with an insight that, yeah, if a human spent time on it, they could actually see some of those things, but it's really hard to apply that amount of human capital to keep eyes on all these situations all the time, and then do all the processing to say, oh, I see what's going on here. Those are some examples of how to apply complex, large data that can be generated across a facility, and what that might mean for the clinical or social care of residents.
So before we go on and really get more deep into the staffing tool or possibilities, I just want to get a clear picture, because some of the things you described would clearly be in something provided by a vendor. So they're doing the programming, they're developing a way to use AI or maybe automation in the services you're already paying for receiving. But I also know there's a lot of do-it-yourself attitude around this, especially with ChatGPT. You know, when you talk about writing a job description, for instance, and filling a role, do you worry that people are out there saying, well, let me put this question into ChatGPT, and then they're just putting a job ad out that way? Like, are there some dangers? Or are we going to talk more about, that question or that service being embedded in your staffing partnerships and tools that you have?
So there's this really interesting study that was just released by a group of scholars at Harvard, and they partnered with Boston Consulting Group. And this is kind of like a long meandering answer, but we'll get exactly to what you're asking. They partner with Boston Consulting Group. They have 750 some odd consultants, and they randomly assign them to, you guys use ChatGPT, and then you people don't. And they give them a series of very consulting-ish tasks, and then they measure, they time, and just evaluate the performance of these consultants between the people using technology and the people who aren't. And what they found is that the people who use this AI technology did their work faster, they did the work better, but only on some tasks. There were some tasks where they did worse on average because they fell asleep at the wheel, is what the paper describes, where I got so comfortable accepting the output of ChatGPT, to use that as an example, and I didn't do proper quality assurance on it, and then I ended up like putting up a job recommendation that I found out later, somebody reads it and they're like, is this really like, I don't like, this seems kind of weird, or it has like some strange verbiage in it, or it's like for a hospital and you're not a hospital. And because the language is so convincing that you just kind of start speed reading it and you don't like pay careful attention to it, and then you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. There's some even like famous headlines of people using ChatGPT to do their job and then like failing at their job because ChatGPT is not a lawyer and is not going to like write you a full legal brief. It can give you pages that sound like a legal brief, but it's not going to like really give you always fact-based information in that way. So there's a lot of, I think, as you use it more, you become more familiar with what jobs it does really well at and what jobs are kind of outside that frontier, and where you need to be really attentive and where you can expect it to do well. And I think that's like kind of what we're all in the middle in. We're kind of like living on this jagged frontier, and sometimes the tasks are inside it and we can do really well, and sometimes it's outside it.
Okay.
And
I kind of wanted to introduce that cautionary element here early, because we're going to talk about all of these things, and I don't want to give the idea broadly that this is a do-it-yourself environment. Like, there's a lot of knowledge that has to go into these processes, and you need some experts to help guide you. Rip, did you want to add anything to that before I jump to our next question?
Yeah, I think both you talked about commercialized offerings that are typically not going to be we figured out all the answers here, just use this, but rather giving configuration opportunities to the end user to say, I need to be a little bit more lenient on this parameter or a little bit stricter on this other parameter, so that the user can decide how they want to use the tools and tailor it accordingly. If that's an optimization problem like scheduling, every facility or enterprise is going to have slightly different rules that they want to solve for. And it's the role of vendors to make sure that they can create a set of tools that have the power of the technology behind the scenes and appropriate training tools and data behind the scenes, so that you don't create false positive or false negative scenarios, but allow the users to make sure that they're adapting those tools to accommodate their specific use case. And on Ben's point on the generative AI side of generating, in this case, text, really making sure that how that gets done is part of your workflow of, do I have a role that's necessary? What are the requirements of that role? How do I write the spec for that role in such a way that it gets picked up by the appropriate job boards, et cetera, that's convincing to an end user, but make sure that it reflects my needs? You really need to have the human to make sure that that says what you need it to say, rather than, hey, this looks pretty convincing, I'll put it up there, and at a first glance it works for people. How and when to use those things, I think you're going to see a lot more curation on localizing these generic tools for something that's very use case specific.
Okay, so you mentioned one of those use cases. So let's get into flexibility and scheduling. So obviously a lot of demand for flexibility from our nursing staff now. Can you talk a little bit about why AI and machine learning could be so critical to making flexible scheduling work? And Ben, you want to start with this one?
yeah, sure. So a fun little homework exercise when this is over is go to Wikipedia and put in nurse scheduling problem. And you'll get a page that describes nurse scheduling as like a famous problem in mathematics to solve. And it's been there for at least 20 years and maybe longer. This is like, nurse scheduling is just hard to do, period. And we also have this ongoing nurse shortage as well. And so you really want to make your nurses happy as you can. And I think what we've kind of seen over the years, and more so increasingly, is that 12-hour shifts can push some nurses away that would otherwise be happy to work in some other capacity or with some other with some other schedule. They would be happy to stay by the bedside, but under the current very strict logic of our scheduling rotations, they they aren't happy to stick with it. But that's really hard for a scheduler to manage. Like I can fill out a spreadsheet and put names in the different boxes and say, look, you've got this shift, you've got this shift, I'll take this shift, you take this shift. But when it's not like clean squares that stack up neatly to fill out a full day, and it's like this nurse is available, but only on certain days or only for certain windows, or maybe only for like a 5-hour window on certain afternoons, then the complexity of the problem just gets really large. And I'm not dealing with like clean squares that I can just stack up. I'm like solving a big jigsaw puzzle, and every nurse has got kind of a different shape, and how do I fit it together to fill the day is just a lot more difficult. But this is something that AI can do. We can kind of tap into that larger computing power. And as long as I can articulate what it is that I'm trying to do and what a good schedule looks like, or what is an outcome that I'm trying to achieve, be it if I'm trying to reduce nurse burnout, or if I'm trying to reduce my overtime bill, or if I'm trying to reduce the number of kind of doubles that somebody might work. Whatever those outcomes are, if I can pass those into the machine, then I can let the machine come up with a schedule that fits these pieces together in a way certainly much faster than I could do myself, and usually pretty good as well. And it might surprise me with some of the answers, and I might think it might be different than what I would have put together with my kind of regular squares. But then you can like also measure the outcomes and hold them up against what you expected and see if it really does deliver more flexible and better scheduling.
I'm curious, you mentioned a lot of metrics there. Can you use the tool to adjust for consistency, which, in nursing staff, a lot of the people on today's webinar probably care a lot about that. Is that something you can accommodate?
If it's a good tool, then I would hope so. Consistency is super important. And I know researchers who are working on algorithms that optimize for consistency. And some of their solutions are surprising in that they recommend that you actually schedule your part-time staff first and then your full-time staff later, which is a little different than I think a heuristic that many facilities follow, where you schedule your full-time staff first and then you kind of like fill in the gaps with your part-time or per diem staff.
Actually, this reported on I'm sorry, I was just saying we reported on an academic study that was not about AI at all, but it recommended the same strategy. So that's interesting.
Yeah, maybe we're thinking about the same thing. I haven't seen that particular algorithm codified in a product yet, but yes, consistency has to be one of these metrics. If it's not on the list, then go find a new vendor, because this is hugely important.
And the other question,
it's important.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say it's important to reflect all the different data elements that Ben just articulated of nurse satisfaction and burnout and how much time they're spending in the clinical record and what their needs are from a outside of work basis and what the employer is trying to solve for. That the only way you can use AI to solve for these things is to make sure that you're capturing and training on all that data and asking for the outcomes to be just like you described of, I need these certain things to be described of a certain degree, so constraints call them, around nurse retention, around satisfaction, around consistency of patient experience, and make sure that you're building a solution set that solves for all those things. Otherwise, AI can generate really wacky results that look good on one topic, but actually have optimized that one topic by offsetting with a whole bunch of other unintended consequences that you just didn't ask the computer to go look at. So building those in a careful way is really important.
So I want to follow up, Rip, and ask you about the impact to the person doing the scheduling. And then wanted to also ask, I'm not sure which of you would want to answer this aspect, but about being able to account for pricing You mentioned overtime, certainly a factor too. Is that something else that can be addressed?
So I'll take those in reverse order. So
Okay.
the use of overtime and the use of what your pay rate is for a nurse are parameters that a client or a facility should put into their models to say that this is what we need to solve for within the dynamic, just like nurse satisfaction or a variety of other things, that you need to apply the appropriate weight across each one of these things, and whether they're hard and fast rules or whether they're something you have some flex around, so that the computer can help you create a best fit solution. The more parameters you add that are hard and fast, the more likely it is that your solution will have no solution. If you're trying to solve for too many things at the same time, it's like any kind of personal problem we might all have, of like, you can't have all those things all at the same time. I want a cheap house close into the city that's really nice, that my kids can grow up in the backyard, and I have a 10-minute commute to work. That just doesn't exist. You have
Good
to
luck,
make some
right?
commitments. Yeah, exactly. It's a different way of manifesting the same set of criteria. And we believe fairly strongly that what those criteria are need to be very obvious to the end user and configurable by the people who ultimately the AI is there to help, which gets to the former part of your question about how does this change the behavior of the facility or the scheduler, and how they engage with the technology, which have a couple different layers to it. You have the corporate entity and what their business goals are. You have the facility, you have the patient experience, and you have the scheduler themselves, that each have some layer of need, and you need to create that set of needs in a hierarchical way, so that if you have even state level or federal level requirements around what workplace rules are, or what wage and hour rules are, those need to be codified in the system. If they're done at a state or federal or city level, those are helpfully done by vendors. But things that are done at the corporate group level or the facility level or the shift level, the tools need to be put in front of those end users to help them configure accordingly. But you don't want to create disconnects where the local scheduler may say, I need somebody to show up on this shift. But if they're working within a corporate construct that says, well, you can't pay overtime or you can't use these other tools, that creates some internal conflict between the person who needs to put a body into a shift and what the corporate goals are. So do you create that as hard and fast logic, or do you create it as fuzzy logic that says, okay, you can break the rule right now, but we need to have an offline report that shows when that's happened, so that you can have a discussion about how to improve these things over time, and provide that degree of transparency, which allows for a feedback loop to occur to help the next time be better and smarter. And that's one of the benefits of AI, is if you have something that looks like a weird outcome or an atypical outcome at the first pass, creating that as a feedback loop to say, this was strange, I don't like that outcome for this reason, do it differently next time. And the tools will get smarter next time to help you solve for that edge case scenario. I covered a lot of topics in there about what loopers are and feedback loops. So tell me if there's anything else to follow up on.
That's great. I just want to say, I know I had in my notes also that, you kind of, as you talked about needing somebody to look at a potential job description and still bring that human element, that you would still have to do that here with scheduling in terms of, local rules. You mentioned regulation, but also things like your union contracts or your workers' commute times. So that human touch continues to be really important. If you want to add anything there.
I'll just add that I think the future that we're trending toward generally, and faster in some industries and slower in other industries, is a little bit more of like kind of a cyborg future, or like AI is your Iron Man suit that helps a person be really awesome, and less of a you're fired sign for all the humans, and like Kim, you're fine. Your ChatGPT is not gonna wipe your job out, you're
Not yet.
just fine for that. And well, and there's always going to be some like fear and hype along that way. You like see how quickly the AI can do a certain thing, and you're like, your mind just immediately goes like to this extreme kind of robot takeover imagination. But I think the reality is much more grounded in that, like, look, this is a tool like many other tools that have come over, over centuries, that helps us be really fast at things. And it helps well-trained, well-practiced people be especially fast and especially good. And so if you are a good writer, you can use ChatGPT to write much more, and you can know when it's good and you can know when it's bad, and you can kind of like correct it and end up with a really great outcome. And
Well,
It
I think
frees
that's
up,
what we'll see.
frees up time though to go do something else with, right? So you, by compressing what would otherwise be rote tasks within your role, and typically those rote tasks can take up a lot of your time and make you frazzled and not your best operator self for the role you have. If you can compress those rote tasks into something where you're doing the final 20% of editing to make sure that it's really right, it can free up time for that person to person empathy. So you're talking to a nurse about what their shift looks like, or you're talking to a resident about whom they're going to be spending time with, and how you can change your time as an individual who uses AI allows you to go do the things that you probably wanted to go do in the first place until all the other kind of non AI informed technology got in your way. I mean, think about how many nurses did not sign up to do 10,000 button clicks in an EMR system every day to handle a coding environment. If they went in and that tool had already set those things up for them, it would allow them to spend their time on patient care, which is what they really wanted to do in the first place.
All right, I'm going to put a pin in that for just a second. I want to come back
Sure.
and talk a little bit more about how it's an add-on, not a takeaway. But let's go back for a minute, Rip, because we've talked about a couple of subjects or possibilities for AI so far, but can you talk about some other examples? I think the first one we had talked about previously was revenue cycle optimization, and kind of going back to some of those other potential strengths.
Sure. So this is kind of stepping aside from the nurse scheduling problem that Ben just talked to, and going into, there's actually some of the root causes for why clinicians are facing burnout around this engagement with the EMR we were just talking to, and how to handle coding at the bedside of what actually happened in patient care, so the charting process, and then the billing and coding process to make sure what happened with the patient is what you are ultimately going to bill for, and having AI informed tools that can help guide what recommended codes are versus what the human says, yes, this is something that actually happened. It can make that charting and coding process much easier on the clinicians that are working at the bedside, and make their debrief work that much easier for them to be able to go home at the end of their shift. There's also an overlay on that in terms of compliance management and making sure that all the appropriate documentation has been captured, and reminding the users when something is missing in the systems, to make sure that in the event of either corporate oversight or an audit that needs to come in, that you're prepared for those things in a way that allows you to be more proactive on something that might be coming in as a data oriented question, rather than very reactive in the moment when ultimately somebody comes in asking for a series of records. We talked a little bit about the talent acquisition side in terms of making sure, number one, what your staffing profile should look like to accommodate for census and variability that might exist across your resident population. So how many full-time staff of what type of clinical credential, and what kind of attrition do you need to model for? AI is really good at those things, to say, if I want to go from a 70% census rate to an 80% census rate, what do I need to do on my staffing profile to make that work? It's very good at solving those kinds of optimization problems. And And we also spoke a little bit about newsletters and generating content that are facility or geography specific. That, if you're looking at facilities across different geographies, they're solving similar in-facility programming questions, but done with a relatively local flair based on what's going on in the respective community and how to tailor content according to those geographies. Those are a few, but I can rattle off a few more if it's helpful, but I recognize it goes on for a ways.
Okay, that's good. And Ben, I wanted to ask you about influences we're maybe seeing from other industries and how those might filter over to LTC.
Yeah. So as mentioned, like, we're living in it. This is like the AI boom, and so definitely other industries are adopting AI in ways that long-term care could potentially borrow from in the future, and whether it does or not, I mean, we'll see. But one example that comes to mind is a friend of mine who started a truck safety company. So he partners with these large semi-truck driving companies and uses their GPS data, kind of like the wearables that Rip was talking about earlier on the patient side, but monitors the drivers and then also gathers some behavioral data as well, and checks in with them. How am I doing today? How am I doing today? And combines all that data in a way that reduces trucking accidents. And it's one of these like low, kind of a rare outcome, but extremely bad when it happens. And so is worth the investment to try and reduce those bad outcomes as much as you can. And long-term care is similar, where there are some outcomes that are extremely bad and are worth investing in technology to try and avoid those like extremely bad outcomes. And as to what the data would be is not entirely clear, but there's definitely, I think, opportunities that Rip has mentioned on the patient side. But this is me speculating, but I would not be surprised if we saw that on the nurse side as well. So like, how are your nurses doing? And are you starting to feel burnt out? And I'm going to use AI to be a little bit more proactive in checking in and seeing how you're doing and getting your thumbs up or your thumbs down at the end of your shift. And if I'm starting to get a lot of thumbs down, then I can intervene in some way. I might give you a break on a weekend when I might have otherwise scheduled you, or I might give you a slightly easier patient mix than I would have otherwise, and do what I can to kind of get your thumb to turn back up so that I can not burn you out. I can keep you at my
right.
Keep you happily employed for longer.
Okay, great example. All right, so let's go back to this idea that LTC can use artificial intelligence and other tools to help their workers, not to replace them. Let's talk a little bit about tech and touch. What are some areas where that's really critical? Ben, you want to start and talk about some of the risks for AI?
Yeah, so AI is really good at identifying patterns and continuing them, or flagging when you've deviated from a pattern. And it learns the patterns from the data that you provide it. And sometimes the data is not always the world that we want to replicate. And there could be bias in the data that we feed these algorithms. And then if we're not careful in stating kind of what our objectives are or putting good guardrails on, then it can perpetuate or continue or even scale up those bad patterns that we're feeding it. And we've seen that in the employment space, where AI can be fed a bunch of resumes and then be told, like, this is who we hired and this is who we didn't. And if there's bias in those past hiring decisions, then that's what the AI learns to do. And so where there are questions of fairness, of equity, we need to be very, like, just go in with our eyes wide open and ask lots and lots of questions to make sure that the AI is not kind of taking us down a bad path. And it's not always obvious in the moment. Like the AI can be so convincing in its recommendations, and especially when it's packaged in sweet looking software, it can be really hard to flag it, like to call it out and say, like, I think you're wrong. And so especially in applications of hiring, in policing, and even as Rip mentions, in like making specific diagnoses, there are rules in place that limit or regulate the use of AI in these types of settings, and it's because it's continuing some of those bad patterns that have existed historically.
Rip, you want to jump in here and talk more about the human intervention?
Yeah, and I can add a little bit on what Ben was just saying too. It's part of the reason why working with vendors that are, you can ask good questions of those vendors, but to make sure that they're working from a representative training data set. There was a fairly notable story several years ago where IBM trained some Watson tools for radiology off of some data sets out of MD Anderson that had some bias based into them based on the fact that they're working with a large academic center that wasn't representative of a community hospital. And the tools didn't work in a representative way, and they needed to make pretty significant changes in how they deployed those. And at Ben's point, it wasn't obvious at the beginning that was the case. It took quite a bit of time to identify what was really going on in the underlying data. It's a good example because it's one that I think people hear about an awful lot, about radiology training data sets and using AI to replace radiologists in detection of a lesion that may be cancerous. The role of the radiologist or the diagnosing clinician on top of that, an AI identifying something that looks like a lesion for a human to look at versus an AI saying with definitive diagnosis what type of lesion that is. I would be reluctant to say we will ever get to a point that a computer will say definitively exactly what something is based off of its training data. The role of the clinician is not just to identify what that is, but to make sure that how you're handling that diagnosis amongst all of the other presenting symptoms and all of the tools that are available. It can help them do their job faster, and it can help them do their job in a maybe more precise way. But the role of the radiologist, the role of the pathologist, the role of the diagnosing clinician, and how to bring all that information together and handle the patient and sometimes their family around what that clinical pathway ultimately needs to look like is something that requires a fairly significant amount of human intervention. And neither the clinicians nor their families will be in a place where the computer told them something, therefore they're going to go follow a clinical pathway that has 25 pages of a PDF file saying what you're going to go do next. That's just not practical. The human needs to be in a position to message each of those things and to answer questions along the way, and that's not something that a computer will ever replace. That's just on the clinical judgment side alone, let alone all the other potential use cases. Sorry, it looked like you were going to react, Kim.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know we've had quite a few surveys/studies that talk about seniors especially are not trusting of anything that is based solely on technology. They are very hesitant they probably wouldn't respond well to something that's delivered as a result of AI. So you need that human element at the end, no matter what, and that interpretation.
It is important, though, for the humans to be as well informed as they can be. And with seniors, you can identify information silos that having the information and then using AI to make decisions around the information are critical. In the PERS industry, it's pretty normal for a family to only realize after the fact that there were actually other people acting in a caregiving capacity to their care recipient or their family member than they might have originally realized because of some information compartmentalization that typically their mom may have not been sharing whom all was helping. And being able to understand all those different touch points and where somebody was receiving support from, that if they knew those things and that information had come together, it would have been much more helpful to make predictive decisions around what to go do differently around a care pathway. Most of those are really social determinants rather than clinical, because if they're clinical, you get into the record, you kind of know what's going on. But that, hey, I'm not as stable as I used to be, or I'm forgetting things, or my neighbor comes over to help me out with some food or move some things around. It's not as obvious for family to see those things, and it can happen both in the home and in a community setting, where getting that information together and how to make an effective care plan is absolutely critical. And AI is only as good as the information you feed it. So making sure that you have that information architecture in place to be able to make good decisions, that should happen independent of AI, and AI can make it better once you have that information.
And I'm sorry, Ben, I know you want to say something, but I don't want to lose sight of this too. I wanted to also ask Rip specifically, you gave some examples that are broadly healthcare related, but could you talk about medication management and nutrition in the nursing home, and how those might be areas that could be problematic if that human touch isn't there?
Yeah, so medication management, I'd actually put medication management really more in the algorithmic category, and maybe identifying medication conflicts. You don't want AI to be saying, oh, you should be taking your aspirin at 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., not 8 a.m. and 11 p.m. Those things really need to be routine based on a clinician saying that this is when you need to be taking this medication. What AI can be helpful with is if you have multiple prescribing clinicians that don't necessarily have all the same information about all the other medications you're on, and when to identify conflicts and or side effects that you're trying to manage. That we've all seen situations where you end up layering on too many different medications, and actually the medications are causing more side effects, and managing those side effects that start to get runaway problems. And AI can be helpful at reconciling those things and creating something that's a little bit more routine based, which gets into the nutrition side and the side effect management across those medications, where identifying if a resident is engaging in a nutrition regime, or whether they're even eating in a community setting or their own, or they're eating the food that's been provided to them. You don't necessarily always see that maybe their ability to masticate food isn't there, or the ability to swallow is starting to decline. And that can lead to significant other clinical complications, but are not immediately obvious. So a simple data point that doesn't necessarily get captured is how much food that was provided is actually consumed, and what was the time it took for somebody to consume that food. So making sure that you have that outcome measured and see what's going on across that patient journey. That can be significant implications, not just on your oral health, but your ability to maintain your body functions, UTI, if you're getting dehydrated, and then all the other clinical complications that come off of those things. I'm sure many people on this call recognize all these social determinants very quickly turn into clinical determinants if you're not keeping an eye on those things. So recognize the medications are a component to that, but how you manage your activities of daily living, of your eating frequency and what you're consuming, your toileting frequency and how you're consuming, or what your volumes are around that, are significant. You hear about smart toilets, and some people might laugh at that a little bit, but it's actually a pretty significant sensor to drive what some of those downstream clinical indicators might look like.
All right, Ben, did you still want to jump in on a point here?
I think I'll just say one thing on I want to be careful we don't strike a tone that's like the humans have to babysit AI. We do, but AI can also correct and improve sometimes flawed or poor human decision making. And if I'm like a doctor nearing the end of my shift, maybe I'm a little more, I don't know, I just want to go home. And so I'm going to I'm just going to do the surgery. I'm going to do a C-section and just get this baby out so that I can go home, instead of doing something else and waiting or taking a longer thing. And so the AI can also help us make better decisions as well. And I think that's really the best possible world, is we keep our eye on AI and make sure that it's not doing anything wonky. But then if it's nudging us to make informed decisions and structured decisions, instead of emotional or impulsive decisions, then I think that we can do a lot to just live in a better world.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So last question, and then we'll jump into Q&A. What should long-term care facilities look for and ask when they're vetting vendors about AI solutions for staffing and also for patient care? Who wants to go first?
I'll take this
I'm happy
one.
to take it. Go for it, Ben.
Yeah, I love this question, and that is a big part of my job is to talk to different vendors and to kind of assess the validity of their AI claims. And I usually ask a few questions. I want to know first where the data lives, and is this a tool that is kind of living inside my computer and looking at my data inside my computer, or is it just going into the cloud? Is it do they suck up my data and then analyze it there and then spit some recommendations? I just want to map out where the data goes, and does it stay within a box when they have it, or are they also sending it out to other tools that they use? And if you're not careful, your data can like sprawl pretty quickly to the vendor that you're talking to, and then their vendors, and then their vendors, and then you really have no idea like where it stops. So I want to know where the data lives. The other thing I want to know is how is the model learning, and what is the feedback loop? And that might not be so much of an AI question as it is just the product question. But I want to look for that like thumbs up or thumbs down feedback. I want to look at how I can tell the model that I didn't like it, and kind of nudge it to improve over time. And that's not always obvious. There are some products where they just say, oh, it's in your data, and we'll just kind of like look at your historical data and we'll just kind of roll it forward. In which case you're just buying an automation tool, and even if it's using AI to kind of like roll it forward, I think good AI products will always have some sort of feedback loop that you can use to improve the product and the algorithm over time.
Okay.
And I think the last question I ask is like, what is the objective of the tool itself, and how, maybe it's just the thumbs up or thumbs down that I provide it with, but what are the other outcomes that it's looking at or watching and trying to maximize or reduce? And if you're not careful, you might be optimizing for the wrong thing. Like if I have a team of marketers and I give them all coupons and say like, hey, I want you all to go give out coupons for a coffee shop or something. And these are like my little AI models, if you will. And then I give them like a point every time I get a coupon at my coffee shop. If I'm not careful, I might have some of these people just camp out outside the door of the coffee shop. And then, as everybody's going in, they're just going to give out these coupons. And then it's like, wow, this is like really effective, but it's not really driving the outcome that you want. And so making sure that you're very thoughtful in looking for like, how are you measuring success, and driving towards that success is another big set of questions. Rip, what would you add?
I think those are absolutely critical, and the only thing I'd put on top of that is be careful of hammers looking for nails, where yes, this is a tool, but it's not the only tool out there, and there's sometimes that it's very, very helpful, and there's other times that doing it a different way is also totally appropriate. So in a hype cycle like we're in right now, it's certainly a thing, but it's not the only answer out there, and it's important to think through what problem you're trying to solve, and then what the best tools are to solve that problem, rather than saying, where do I shove AI into every little crevice of the organization?
All right, let me jump to Q&A. We only have about 5 minutes left. So we talked about this subject a lot, but want to get to a different angle. You guys tried to reassure me about my job security. So what tips do you have for communicating to staff in a nursing home that AI tools are meant to augment their capabilities rather than replace them? What are those discussions? Who needs to give that reassurance?
I think that's a conversation within the teams about what the end objective is around resident care and patient care, and how a facility is run, where having that frontline team that's not spending their time staring at a computer screen, and that's not really the point of the work, is to stare at a computer screen, but rather to engage in residents and their families, and how AI is used to support that engagement model, rather than spending your time to go into work and stare at a computer to figure out what the schedule needs to look like, or how to write a job spec, or how to write the newsletter. This makes those tasks a little bit easier to free up a little bit of your time. It's not going to fundamentally replace that holistic role. It might replace tasks, but not the overall role.
I like the twin messages of empowerment and also making you better at your job potentially at the same time.
Absolutely.
So we talked a little bit about this, but want to revisit it. Personalized care plans generated by AI may seem beneficial, but our staff is already dealing with automation fatigue. How do you balance the two?
Go ahead.
This is a good question, and I certainly think my workday is more exciting and fun when I get to make some decisions and have an input on where my projects go, and it's got to be the same. That's not unique to me. I think we all want to feel like we have ownership, and that people are listening to us, and that that's what makes our workday fun. And so, yeah, if a robot comes in and says like, hey, all you need to do now is like execute this list of orders that I've written, that's like maybe not so fun. And so I think what I would recommend in that setting is like, well, what's your feedback? And like, let's try and gather your feedback and solicit your feedback, and how would you do it? And how does your care plan kind of like improve upon what the machines are providing? And that's maybe your end result. And if we can use the machine to kind of like get us to a B+, and then you take it the rest of the way and make it an A+, then you still have an opportunity to influence the end result. You get to be creative in your own way, and things that are maybe outside the data feed that the machines are picking up on, and you can use that to improve the quality of care at your facility.
All right. Thanks, Ben. All right, guys, we're just about out of time, so I'm going to end it on that. I'd like to thank you both very much for your expertise today. And the three of us, to our audience, we hope you enjoyed this webinar and find it helpful as you navigate this quickly booming environment, as Ben said a couple of times. Thanks also to our session sponsor, IntelliCare. You can learn more about their services at intellicare.com. And finally, we want to thank you, our audience. You've been a big part of the success of our Tech Awards and Summit so far today. We have another CE session coming up at 1:30 Eastern. That's creating senior living communities that flourish. And of course, you can come back to the virtual theater at 3 Eastern for the presentation of the 2023 McKnight's Excellence in Technology Awards. And finally, this session will be archived and available on demand shortly after the broadcast. You can access it again, or others can experience it for the first time by going to the registration page and re-entering the studio. That's at mcknights.com/09/2023 Tech Awards. For now, this is Kim Marcellus for McKnight's. Have a great afternoon.